and also how we all, something trips our trigger along the way to decide how we want to get into real estate, or how we want to be a preacher, or how we want to be a world traveler, or whatever. Something, trips our trigger way back in our childhood. So you could ask me how I decided to get into real estate. If you want to do that, that's another little story I could tell. So
it's whatever you want, Steve. Whatever you want. I told you yesterday.
This is about my first job.
Yeah.
And then this is my first house, a converted railroad car.
Okay.
So.
Okay. So we started.
Okay. Are we starting now?
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
So. You asked me about my first job.
Well, hold on. There needs to be introductions. We got to get better at this.
Yeah.
So we have another episode of real estate professional Adam Metzker. We're really excited to have him here. He's looking very dapper today. Very happy to have you gentlemen here. You guys have a long history together. Your conversations are always a lot of fun. It's always good to see how people got to where they are.
Yeah.
And that's a really big deal. I know you have a lot of stories to tell, and you have a really long journey that's inspiring.
Yes, I'm beginning to position myself as a storyteller. I'm getting into my 70s now, and I'm still very involved in real estate, but I do like going around telling stories. My last book went to #1 on Amazon, Only Broken Seeds Grow. There were 59 very short stories in that, and I really love talking in front of groups and telling all of those stories that made me to become the person that I am today.
So with that said, everybody, we have Stephen Ames in the building.
Okay, well,
So you guys can't hear the applause that's happening right now because you don't have headphones on.
Okay.
But there's some applause going for you because you deserve it, sir.
So as we were speaking a little while ago, I brought in a little box, and it's of macaroni and cheese, and I'm going to reach for that in just a second. And I was just telling Adam that my very first job, and it wasn't a paying job, but I'm going to reach for it now and show it to you. This is obviously an empty box of macaroni and cheese.
Remember to look at the camera, though.
Okay.
You don't want to be looking up here. That's just off camera.
Thank you.
Yep.
It's obviously an empty box of macaroni and cheese, and it's the exact same box and the exact same color and height and width and length that we used, that we looked for in a little bitty grocery store a couple of blocks down the road from our house, where we lived in the country just south of Mason, Michigan, back in the 50s. And my dad would go to a bar and meet a lady and would take off and disappear for 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 days. He had a special arrangement with his dad, He had a special arrangement with his boss where he could go and come whenever he wanted to. He could work 5 half days in a row, or he could work 5 full days in a row, or he could skip 5 full days in a row and still come back and have a job waiting for him. So that was good for him, maybe. He'd take off, would not have enough food for all of us. I was the 5th one born out of 8 kids, by the way.
Wow.
The 2 older ones were gone by the time I was a little guy.
Wow.
But so he would disappear. We'd run out of food, and my oldest sister Joanna would say, "Okay, let's go walk the ditches." And so it was the equivalent of about 2 blocks from where we lived to a little store down on the corner. It had 2 gas pumps. It had 3 aisles. It was just a real tiny store on the corner of an intersection. And so we would walk the ditches. We'd find 10 pop bottles. The proprietor would give us 2 cents each for the bottles. And for 10 bottles was 20 cents. And this box of macaroni and cheese, as I was saying a moment ago, is the exact same size, exact same colors of Kraft macaroni and cheese as back in the 1950s, 1953 actually. I was born in 1950. So I was a very little boy, but I remember walking the ditches and picking up those bottles. We'd trade 10 bottles for the equivalent of 20 cents, and we'd buy this box of macaroni and cheese.
Wow.
And that would feed 6 of us, and that would get us through the day. And sometimes 2 or 3 or 4 days in a row, we'd walk those same ditches picking up bottles. I was the little guy that couldn't find the bottles laying here and there because all my older brothers and sisters would be out ahead of me picking them up. But I was the little guy that found those bottles that were halfway buried in the dirt that nobody else wanted to stop for. And so I would say, hey, and bring my oldest sister, Joanna, and all the rest of them back, and we'd find a way to dig out those bottles, clean them up, and take them into the same store up on the corner. And of course, we'd get 2 cents a piece out of those bottles as well. So I was contributing. I tell people that was my very first job, even though I didn't get any pay. I guess I got macaroni and cheese. But I'm doing another book on all of my jobs from infancy to adolescence. And that will be the very first story. This that I'm telling now will be the very first story in that book. But
do you feel that carried on in your life, where you would find things that other people wouldn't find?
My dad always wanted us to live with scarcity because he thought that would make us stronger. And he constantly denied us everything and anything. And looking back on it, that does make you stronger to have to live without. But he was somewhat of a sadist, and he almost took some pride in dragging us through the mud and frustrating us and humiliating us. And that was the very bad part of my dad. And he was just not a very good person, although I tell in one of my stories, when he would drink, after about the third drink, whiskey or vodka or whatever, he'd get real happy, he'd get really friendly, he'd have a 180-degree change of personality. And he wanted to be your friend. He wanted to take you somewhere. He wanted to give you something, do you a favor, and just became so friendly and became the nicest person on earth. But so we almost applauded the times when he would drink because the pressure would be off. Otherwise, it was like living in a torture chamber. So he was very, very severe most of the time. But when he would drink, and not only that, he would go to bed early, and then we could relax and we could play like normal kids, and we could be ourselves like normal kids instead of being, instead of having so much pressure on us to do this or do that and all the things that we didn't want to do. So anyway, that's my little story about my first job. And the leader of our group was my oldest sister, Joanna, of course. And I'll remember, it seemed like it was just yesterday that I was picking up those pop bottles. I was born in 1950, and this was the summer of 53 and the summer of 54. So it's been over 70 years ago. Wow. And that sticks in my memory just like, what I had for breakfast this morning.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Steve. That's very touching.
All right, you bet. You're very welcome.
Yeah. What else would you like to discuss?
Okay, we could do another story. I know this is being edited, so we could do another story. And I'd like to start a second story, and that would be about this picture that I'm holding up. And this was taken in August of 1954. And I'm the little guy in the front. My brother is standing there with a doll, with a rag doll, a very large rag doll. And I'm standing on his right. And it's very late in the day, and we're all squinting because at that time of the day, the sun is almost down, and we're looking directly into the sun. But, and you see the tallest one there on my brother's left would be Joanna, our oldest sister. And then there's Jean and Eileen and my brother Robert, who we always called Bob, and then myself, Steve. And that was my mom in the middle. But this was actually in front of a converted railroad car. This is the first home that I remember. And times were pretty tough, and my dad had lived through the Depression, but he was a person that he almost applauded scarcity, as I was saying in another interview. He almost didn't want us to have anything and thought we would be more appreciative if we didn't have anything, and would be more appreciative once we got older and got on our own. I think that was his philosophy, but it wasn't a very good philosophy because he didn't treat us very well. But this tells quite a bit. You can see my brother there, right above his ear. You can see his last haircut, or the razor or the shears went down to his skin. So all these aspects of the poverty that my dad dragged us through. And we could have lived a lot better, by the way. He worked as a stone cutter, and he made well above average as a laborer. And we could have lived better, but he was content on just barely giving us the very bare minimum and nothing more. And
What makes you say that?
well, he had money that he was always spending on himself and spending on other people,
Gotcha.
but wasn't spending anything on us. He would take us to the Salvation Army for used clothing. We never once went to a store that sold new clothing, but he'd go to church rummage sales, and he would buy a box full of things for a nickel or a dime. And a lot of times he'd wait around till the end of the rummage sale. Maybe it was a church basement rummage sale that ended at 4 p.m. on a given Saturday, and he'd wait until 10 minutes to 4 before he even got there, which was 10 minutes before closing. And I remember one time my grandmother said to Richard, well, you better hurry up and get there. It's almost 4 o'clock. And he said, yeah, I know. And she said, well, why aren't you going? He said, well, that's the whole idea. I get there right as those old ladies are boxing all of their things up that didn't sell, and I know that they don't want to cart that crap back home with them, and I just ask them to give it to me, and most often they just give me boxes and boxes of that stuff that I don't have to pay for. So that was my dad's philosophy. So yeah, he really dragged us through the mud, and he like I said, thought that he was forcing us to be more appreciative, and he would say like a motto, I'll never be accused of raising up a big batch of undeserving, ungrateful brats. Nobody in the world will ever accuse me of that. Wow. And it was like his motto, and he repeated it on a daily basis. And it was just really, really too bad for us, because it made life very, very uncomfortable for us. Yeah. So, this picture tells quite a bit.
Tell us
I want
more.
to tell just a little bit more about the poverty. So I don't know if you can see the front door there, and then below the front door is a wooden stoop. It's actually a shipping crate, and you can see the corner sticking out there just barely. But that was our front porch, an old shipping crate. This was a converted railroad car. It was just a tar paper shack. You can see the tar paper and the nails holding the tar paper in place. It was just a windbreak. Another thing that shows poverty is the window behind my sister's head there. It's boarded up with plywood, and normally it would be a normal window with glass, like a normal window. And you can see all of us were without shoes. We didn't wear shoes at all from May until the first day or two of September. Back in Michigan, they didn't start the school year until September. And we went all summer without shoes. You can see all of us there standing without shoes. Also, you can see a huge spot on my sister Eileen. She's in the picture there. She's on the far right. And there's a big spot on her dress. And then my sister on the other side, you can see a darkened area where there's grease or some form of dirt or filth on her dress. And this was our best clothing, because our aunt, my grandmother, had come on a train the night before, and my dad had a sister living in Lansing, Michigan, 8 miles away, and she called and said to get those kids dressed up. I'm bringing my Brownie camera, and I'm going to take a couple of pictures. And so I remember Mom having us put on our very best clothing. So this would have been our very best clothing. So anyway, that's some of the poverty, and then the dysfunctionality. You know, they say that 95% of American families experience some form of dysfunctionality in one form or another, through divorce or through unemployment or imprisonment, or just womanizing by the husband, maybe, driving too old of a car that's always breaking down, living in a house that doesn't have proper heating or cooling, these kinds of things are forms of dysfunctionality. And our family was rampant with all these different forms of dysfunctionality.
Do you think that there are families that are completely functional out there?
There are a few, but very few.
Yeah, I would agree
Most
with
of
that.
us are dysfunctional.
I think everyone's dysfunctional.
Yeah, most of us. But it said that 95%, I don't know where I read that, but a few years ago, 95% of American families have some form of dysfunctionality.
Yeah, maybe
And-
maybe they're all functional, and maybe the 5% are not are the ones that are dysfunctional.
Yeah, that could be.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
Sometimes meanings get changed
That's
completely around that way.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a little bit about my childhood, and I was about 3.5 years old here in this picture, and right there where I'm putting my finger is me, and I remember the day this was taken.
Wow, that's impressive.
And
That's
everybody
amazing.
says to me, Steve, you have a very strong memory. I say, yes, I do. For whatever reason, I have a photographic memory of almost everything that happened to me of any
Wow.
significance when I was a little boy.
Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Steve.
Okay.
That's amazing.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I have one more little story, and I'd like to tell about it. And so I can get this turned around here. So I want to talk just a little bit. I am an author. I've written 4 books, and I have another book going that'll be coming out fairly soon. My first book was Scavenger Way to Wealth.
Which I got to read, an amazing book,
Okay.
and I highly recommend.
Yep, so there we are. And I have one going now. My first book was Scavenger Way to Wealth. My second book was Scavenger Way to Real Estate Riches. And this one is Scavenger Way to Shacks on a Shoestring. And I've had it mostly written for a long time, and I've now just in these last few weeks have decided hell or high water, it will be finished very soon. And I have in mind to buy a country house with 2.5 acres, and I'll know in a day or two whether or not I get that house. And if I don't, I'll buy something similar, and I'm going to film all of the procedure of taking an old house, pulling off the old siding, putting on new siding, taking out the old windows, putting in new windows, taking out the old doors, putting on new doors, tearing off the old deck or front porch and putting on a new front porch or a new deck, or installing a deck where one doesn't exist. And also in this particular property, if I get it, we'll put up a double garage. I have a contractor that works fairly cheap, and he's very economical, and he does very good work. He'll make some money, and I plan on filming all of these episodes, maybe having 100 or so 1 or 2 or 3 minute episodes of putting on new shingles or taking out old windows or building the deck, putting up a new garage, and all these topics. And then maybe try to package that up with putting all that on a thumb drive with my book, and maybe including some coaching time with that to whoever the purchaser of my book might be. And so that's what I have in mind for the moment. I always have something in my mind.
Yes.
And
yes,
I'm coming
I
up
love
on
it.
my mid-70s. I'm going to be
Wow.
74 here in a few days.
Wow.
But and I almost can't believe it. I'm mentally I feel very young and refreshed and ready to go, like it's the first day of my life,
Yeah.
my business life. And obviously I'm very near the end of my chronological life.
There could be some
Unfortunately,
time.
maybe I can make it to 100, but it probably isn't going to happen.
I sure hope so, Steve. I'd love to keep talking to you
We've
and
had a lot of
spending
fun.
time.
We've known each other for a long time now,
Yeah.
5 or 6 years, and
Yeah.
it's been great. And I
Yeah.
hope that there's at least 5 or 6 more years of our relationship
Amen.
that will go forward, and we'll keep learning from each other.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And I must say that your idea and the notion of doing some coaching and really sharing your knowledge and your wealth of knowledge and wealth of information can really be something that's very beneficial for a lot of people, because I can tell you that the time that we spend together and we still spend together is very meaningful to me, and I got to learn a lot of things from you, and I hope to continue to learn more things from you, and I really appreciate you sharing, and not just sharing. I mean, you literally took me under your wing. I mean, we drove down to San Antonio together for 3 days to go see your properties over there.
We
and,
went to both of my Texas hotels.
Yes, went to both of your Texas hotels, and you just kind of took me under your wing and showed me the ropes,
Yeah.
and I really cherish that and appreciate that.
Okay,
So,
very
yeah.
good. It's been
So
very nice.
I think you're doing that is a good idea, and I highly recommend that whoever gets puts their hands on your book and
Okay. All right.
on your videos.
Well, I thank you very much.
yeah.
You're very kind, and it's been very, very nice knowing you.
Yeah.
All right. Now I have one more little story. It'll only take about 5 minutes.
You got
and
it.
I know you want to
Take
get out of
10.
here really soon.
Yeah, take 10
All right,
minutes.
so,
no worries.
So
we have
this
time
little
for you, Steve. We have time for you.
So this little story is about how I became connected to real estate,
Oh,
and it's a unique little story, and I'd like to tell about it if you don't mind.
please.
And so I was. This was the summer of '67, and I was 16 years old. I just finished my sophomore year of high school, or there was a day or two left in the school year. Maybe the school year ended somewhere around May 25th at that time, and I worked at the restaurant on Main Street in my little hometown in north central Iowa of Union, Iowa, Union. It's 8 miles south of Eldora. If you can't find Union on the map, you probably can find Eldora, which is Hardin County.
Yeah, I love Eldora and Hardin County. I
Oh.
bank with Hardin County Bank, and it's an amazing bank.
I didn't
so
know
yes.
that. Well, very good. So, yeah. So I'm at the restaurant, and I work quite a bit there, mopping and waxing floors, run the till. I was a waiter. I was a salad boy. I was the chief cook and bottle washer almost. I didn't do very much cooking, but I did almost everything else. Helped with the smorgasbord on Sundays and that was really big because we had hundreds of people come to. They drove from miles around to go to our little smorgasbord there on Main Street in Union, Iowa, back in the '60s. Yeah. So my boss, Orville Norman, said, "You know, Steve, my brother-in-law Kenny Madlin has the filling station up around the corner." I said, "Yeah, I know Kenny." And he said, "Well, he's looking for a summertime helper." And I said, "Okay." He said, you ought to go see him. He said, "I think you could, I know you're looking for summertime work, and he probably could offer you a job." So I go up to the filling station. I think it was a Phillips 66 at that time. And he said, "Yeah," he said, I've got this job." And he said, "Orville tells me that you're quite the hustler." And he said, "I know this would be a good job for you." And he said, "You can help me change oil and grease the cars and change the oil and filter. And we can do," he said, "there's all these things around here." He said, "I'll teach you one by one, and you'll know the business, and I'll be very happy to have you." And I said, "Well," and he said, and I, without me asking him, because that was going to be my next question, he said, "And I'll give you $1 an hour." And I thought to myself, well, about half the people in the town are making $1.25 an hour, and the other half the people in the town were making $1 an hour. So it'd be like maybe a $10 an hour wage nowadays, something like that. Just basic pay, you know. And of course, I better be careful about nowadays because we have so much. Bidenomics has brought, 19% inflation. So
Yeah, by inflation, yeah.
even hamburger flippers in McDonald's are making $14, $15,
yeah.
$16 an hour, which is just a year or two ago they were only making $7 or $8 an
I
hour.
don't think there's one person in
So
the U.S. today that
let's-
does $10 an hour, but I don't know for a fact.
Yeah, and
so.
I love my Democrat friends, but let's let somebody else take over for 4 years, please.
We leave politics aside here, but go ahead.
We'll
go
leave
ahead,
politics
yes.
aside.
So
other
you're
than
making
that.
a $1 half for making $1.15.
And I
you're
decided, I
making $1?
said to myself, I said to him, I said to Kenny Madlin, "Well, I'll think about that. Can I get back a hold of you in a day or so?" And he said yes. And so I was smart enough to say that because something was telling me to jump at it and say yes, I'll take the job. And the other half that was going through my mind, of the information circulating in my head that day, was saying, "Well, just hold off and don't take that, because that might not be that's probably not enough money, because I knew in my head that I deserved $1.25 an hour." So I drove down about 3 blocks away to the Main Street, and there was a park right on Main Street, still is there. And the old duffers old retired guys would sit over there and tell stories of their childhood and whatever. And I come across one group of guys, and they didn't seem to be able to want to help me or share any information with me about how I could find a summer job. And I go to another guy sitting alone. His name was Chuck Eggleston. He had a flower shop, and he had his Social Security, and that flower shop was his, supplementing his wage. And I'd always chat with him off and on. And he said, "What's going on today, Steve?" And I said, "I'm looking for a summertime job." And he said, we talked for a little while, and he said, "You know what?" He said, "I'll bet you 10 to 1. He said, "You could drive down to Albion, Iowa," which was about a 12 or 13-minute drive south of my little hometown of Union. He said, "There's a guy down there by the name of Bernard Felper that lived up around Union here till a year or two ago. And he does part-time farming, and he has a painting business. And he always takes on a kid for his summertime helper. And we're now in the month of May." And he said, "You run down there and ask him. He just might give you a job." And I that very moment, I got in my car and I drove to Albion, Iowa. And it was a little bit after 5 in the afternoon. He had just gotten home, and he was around to the back of the house. I knocked, and his wife said, "Well, I think he's around to the back in the garden." He was on his knees, and he was planting some tomato plants or something. And I introduced myself, and I said, "Do you need a summer helper?" And he said, "As a matter of fact, I do need a summer helper." And he said, "I've just been thinking more and more about that just in these last few days." He says, "It's funny you came along." And I said, "Well," I probably could, be a good helper for you." And he said, "I'll probably hire you." And he said, and I'll give you $1.25 an hour. And without even me asking him how much he would pay me, he spoke up and told me he'd give me $1.25 an hour. And I thought, yes, that's exactly what I wanted. And so at that time, that's $1.25 an hour, 8 hours in a day was $10. $10 in 1967 was a nice little bit of money. It was probably equivalent to between $100 and $125 nowadays, right about that much. I mean, for a high school kid nowadays, if a high school kid could make $125 a day, that's a fair amount of money, isn't it? I think so.
Yeah, there is if they want to work. I don't know any high school kids that want to work.
Nowadays, the high school kids don't want to work.
Some
they
do,
want to play
some do,
video games.
Yeah, some do, but very little.
So anyway, yep. So I got that job and worked the summer. And then as the cold weather started to come here in central Iowa, the cold weather always comes. We have a change from summer to fall or autumn. And this was October, and I got a phone call, and I'd been helping him off and on weekends. And he said, "Steve, this coming weekend," he said, "will be my last outside job." He said, "I've got some painting to do for a farmer." He said, "I got my son-in-law coming up from Des Moines, Bob Bailey." And he said, "If you want to work for me Saturday," he said, "we'll get in about 8 hours." And I thought, boy, 8 hours at $1.25 an hour, that's $10. That's a lot of money. How could I refuse to work a Saturday? He said, "You come along about 8 o'clock. Well, I got there about 8 o'clock, and the frost in Iowa, if the dew is heavy and it gets down close to freezing, that dew will freeze on the top of the grass, and you look across the landscape, and it looks pure white as though it had snowed."
Yeah.
And I went in, and he said, "We got to wait for the frost to burn off." He said, "The sun will come up here. The sun will get warmer pretty soon." He said, "Let's go in and sit down and tell a few stories and have a few cups of coffee and wait about an hour." We waited about an hour, went out to the pickup, looked around, and all the frost had melted. And we started to get in the pickup. And then we got in the pickup, and we started to back out of the driveway out onto the street. And just got out to the street, and he said, "Oh, damn, I forgot my Camels." Those were cigarettes back then, and I think they're still cigarettes today. So we drove back in and parked the pickup, and I was in the middle. His son-in-law, Bob Bailey, was on my right, and Bernard had got out of the pickup to go into the house to get his cigarettes. He said, "Steve," he said, "see that house down there on the corner?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, well, Bernard is in the process of buying that." And I said, "Oh, my God." I said, "He's buying that?" I said, "That's a shack compared to this house. What the hell is he thinking about? This is crazy. Why would he buy that?" He said, "No, Steve, you don't understand. You don't understand at all what I'm about to tell you." He said, "Bernard has a couple of other older houses that he rents out, and he's about ready to buy that, take possession of that, rent that house out, and those tenants will pay him so many dollars a month, and in a few years that house will be completely paid for, and look at all that rent that'll be coming in for a supplement to his Social Security in a few years when he decides to retire. And I said, oh my God, I said, I wasn't thinking about that. And he said, yeah, you might want to think about it a little bit more, because it's something you really definitely should consider. Because if you get started earlier and if you start doing this, buying these older properties this way and fixing them up and renting them out, and you get started early enough, you just might be rich.
Wow.
And I thought that idea of being rich, that stuck in my head. And that was the summer of '67. I was 16 years old.
Wow.
And by the time I was in my mid-20s, I bought my first house. And everyone was talking about real estate. You get real estate takes you there. You can't go anywhere in life if you don't have real estate. At least my painting boss would repeat that phrase to me off and on.
Wow.
And so that was also another helper. But his son-in-law on that very day, when we backed out and pulled back into the driveway, waited for Bernard to go in to get his cigarettes, and he pointed down to the corner and started talking about the little house on the corner. That idea really stuck in my mind, that I wanted to get into properties, and I wanted to let real estate make me rich. And I knew I wanted to be rich someday because my dad completely dragged us through poverty with living in a converted railroad car, half the time not having electricity, and never having proper food, or never having any possessions at all, and never being able to go anywhere. I tell people, too, I went to the Marshalltown Community College in Marshalltown, Iowa. My very first semester, I opened up my world geography book, because you have to take English and history and geography and some of those basic courses, your first few semesters. And I opened that geography book up, and I read that first chapter. It was world geography. And that book just started speaking to me. It was like my Bible. It was like I would speak to it, and it would speak to me. And studying about all the countries around the world, and people and places and things and climates and diets and economies and languages and religions and all of these things. And that was just exactly what I needed, because my dad didn't take me anywhere. And by reading just a few sentences out of that book was already taking me somewhere. Wow. And I knew that I wanted to go. And once I became old enough to make my own decisions, of which I was at that moment, that I was going to be a world traveler. I was going to go somewhere. I was going to learn more about the world. Learning about the world and traveling, it makes you learn about yourself. It forces you to learn about yourself and your own culture.
I very much agree, yeah.
Yep. So in 1970, I went over to Europe for the very first time.
Wow.
And people were saying, oh, wow. Well, it's like it was a lifetime trip, and I maybe never get to go again. And I've been over almost 40 times.
Wow.
And
over the pond.
I have to pinch myself, because it doesn't seem possible. But I think I've been over 37 times.
That's amazing. Amazing.
And but yeah, so how about that? That was the story that propelled me of real estate, and taking those concepts literally, and letting that be my idea to propel myself into the real estate business, and to make money and become wealthy. And I have become wealthy through real estate investing.
That's amazing. Amazing, amazing. Steve, thank you so much for sharing that.
Okay,
Yeah.
absolutely. Anytime.